Hello, everyone. It's 2024, and this is the first episode of the year of the Superhero Finder podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Wilson, and I'm flying around the cosmos looking for inspirational stories, people with things to share, and lessons learned. So, whether you're listening for yourself or maybe you're listening to give something to somebody else, thank you for tuning in. And I'm very excited to be in the room with Izzie. How are you doing, Izzie?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Now, is it for anyone that doesn't know who you are, because there will be a few people watching this that do know, but for anyone that doesn't, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Izzie. I'm a single mum. I live in Devon. I've been through some domestic abuse, some eating disorders, some mental health, physical health, and I'm just here to tell you my story.
I tell you what, for an introduction, that was quite a power punch, wasn't it? You're an open book, aren't you?
Yep.
From me knowing you,
Yeah.
which is really, really good. And I think, especially when you mention, domestic abuse and, being a single mum and kind of that journey, which I think, it'd be really good for us to kind of go into. It just shows strength. And this is why this is a superhero finder. So just put your cape away and we'll just talk without the superhero suit, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Fabulous. Okay, I wonder, so we know each other from TikTok, right?
Yeah.
And it's been approximately how long? Because it feels like years.
So you've been what, like 7 months, maybe, if that? 6, 7 months.
August. Yeah.
Yeah.
About 6 months. Time flies when you're having fun. But one
Yeah,
of the
it does.
things that we kind of connected on, we've talked about on there, is my work within kind of violence against women and girls and kind of male allyship and stuff like that. And then you shared with me some of your story on kind of what you'd been through as well. What do you want to describe that or tell that in a story that you're happy sharing?
It was not my plan. It was not anyone's plan. It was one of those moments of being a teenager, thinking you've met the one, everyone's telling you different, but you get cocky and you're like, no, I know what I'm doing. He seemed perfect. He was absolutely great. He, although looking back, didn't really support me in the way he should have from the get-go. I was at college and he didn't not support it, but he didn't encourage it. So when I was like skipping college, he'd be like, yeah, spend time with me, which I thought was great. I was like, oh my God, this guy wants to spend every waking moment under the sun with me, which, like, to me, who kind of had a really volatile relationship with her mum, we're too close. We're exactly the same. So we just clash. So, having someone who was just like wanting to spend all their time with me and it'd be all about me where we didn't have arguments was great. Which left arguments at home. And slowly but surely, I got alienated from my family and I ended up getting kicked out at 17 because I wanted to spend the night with him. My mum was like, I don't agree with it. It's not happening. If you're going to do that, you can't live with me. And I was like, I'm in love. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this man. This was 4 months in, so it went quick. And then obviously I became homeless. So there was a whole new level of control he got straight away, which I didn't even realize because I'd been sheltered growing up. I didn't know the big wide world. So I relied on him for everything. I didn't know how to pay bills. I didn't know about anything. So I relied on him. We ended up sofa surfing, which there was no violence. There was no bad stuff as such at the time. There was a few bits of name callings and arguments, which, I thought was normal. This was my first serious relationship. People argue. But it was tainted in a way, and I could never really put my finger on it. And I just figured it was because I'd left home, and I chalked it all up to that. We ended up staying for 4 months with a friend who was also a single mum. It was a weird time. We were trying to play house when none of us really knew how to play house in a house that wasn't ours, helping bring up a child of someone we didn't really know. Unfortunately, during the time we were there, something happened to the child and we had to leave. We couldn't stay there anymore, which then put us homeless. So we did 8 months on the streets. So again, I become even more reliant on this man. The violence did start a little bit. He got a little bit pushy. But I just put that down to the stress. We're homeless, he's going to be angry. He's going to be stressed out. It's a little bit my fault because if I, got kicked out of my mum's house. So it had already started the kind of self-blame. Thankfully, we managed to get housed. And that's when everything changed. We got a flat, and for the first week, it was everything I wanted. We had no furniture. We had no money. But, I had a roof over my head with the love of my life, and we were going to, make this perfect little family from nothing. And then he hit me. And I honestly don't think it even registered really, like, the scale of even one hit. I was just like, wow, that happened. But we were in a stressful situation, we had this new flat, we'd been through all this, there was history. It's all right. I'm not easy to live with. And then, one hit turned into two hits, and it went south very quickly. So we went from first week in the flat was fine to 3 weeks in, I didn't get to leave the flat anymore. On several occasions, I was strangled into unconsciousness. He rolled the roost. We had to steal to get food, so we go to the local shop together. So, and I think that's what people forget about the whole hostage situation thing. They assume someone who's been held hostage has been locked away in a room, chained up for a period of time. And that's not always the case. While that was a lot of the case, I was locked in the flat and I couldn't leave. There were occasions where we did get to go, but it was literally with him. Like, he would be almost like attached, like an umbilical cord to me. And I still thought that weirdly is endearing. I thought, this man loves me so much that he needs to be with me at every waking moment to make sure nothing bad happens to me in the big wide world.
Wow.
And I couldn't see it. But what I also didn't realize at the time is it slowly started to affect my mental health. And the beatings kind of turned daily, and then it extended into rape. And I fell pregnant. And initially he was over the moon. And I thought, this is the turning point. Like, this is the turning point. Do you know what I mean? He's happy. We're going to have a baby. Things look really good for a bit. And, I thought this is the change he needed. We're going to be a dad. And then he decided he didn't want the baby anymore. So the beating started again. And I was essentially given the decision of either I can go to the hospital with him and get an abortion, or he would beat it out of me. So self-preservation kicked in, and I decided I was going to go to the hospital. I do feel I was failed in several ways by the hospital and the system. I don't think that enough care or time was taken to make sure that it was solely my decision. And I think looking back, in some ways, it was very clear that I was being pressured into it. But it happened. And then the abuse got even worse. And it got to the point that he was drugging me into unconsciousness. I would wake up and he was doing his thing. And that would have been about the time I fell pregnant again. And again, he was over the moon, but this time he was more over the moon, happier again. And it did get good for 3 or 4 weeks. And then he got it. It went backwards, but it didn't go backwards straight away. It started at the beginning again. So he started getting angry, a bit more pushy, but he wouldn't hit me. He would just kind of rough me around. And I thought, well, this is better. Like, I can live with this. So this doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, he loved the baby. He would make sure that, whatever he did wouldn't hurt it. So we're okay. We're still loved in some strange capacity. Until we found out I was having a girl. And that was it. He didn't want it anymore. I don't know why, but he wanted a boy. And that's when I decided I didn't want to do it again. I wasn't going to lose another baby. I couldn't do it. So I decided to snap back. I woke up one day and he was asleep on the floor, and I repeatedly stomped on his chest. until he was kind of like lying, rolling around on the floor. And then I realized like that was my moment. And I climbed out the flat window, ran down the alley into the phone box and called 999. To which the poor woman on the end of the phone had to listen to him come down to the phone box and unleash his last beating. And the police turned up. He'd left at this point. They took me to my grandparents, and I said, "Oh no, he hit me once, Gran. It was just once. It was a massive argument. It was just once." And I wanted to go back to the flat, so I went back. And he was released 12 hours later, and I dropped charges. At this point, we were evicted from the flat, and I was put into a kind of similar hostel for women with their children. You could have partners there, provided you wanted them. Originally, I said yes, because I was desperate for this little family unit for my baby. You know, no matter how bad he was to me, he could still be a good dad. Even though he didn't want the baby, in some strange little part of my brain, I needed this family unit. I couldn't survive without him. I couldn't breathe without this man.
Yeah.
But one day the security guard turned around to me and he said, "If you don't want him here, all you have to do is say him. We just won't let him in." And it was about a month or so later, like it must have stuck. And we were walking in, and we'd been in town that day, and he'd just been his usual vile self. Do you know what I mean? Of name calling and just belittling me. By this point, I was in psychosis, and I didn't even realize it. I'd had trauma-induced psychosis. I was seeing things that weren't there, all down to kind of just what I know now as my body and my brain trying to protect me from the trauma I was going through, and you know, was putting a barrier in to protect me. And I just decided one day, I said, I don't want to do this anymore, to the security guard, and he didn't let him back in, and that was the break. Like I needed, like he didn't let him back in, and that was it. I was free. And then I met a guy very, very soon later who had been in and out of prison, who was on bail for attempted murder. And this guy was 6'4", covered in tattoos, scary looking. Like I would have crossed the street to avoid him before any of this.
Yeah.
But he stood up to me, stood up to Daniel again when I was around. And that was great. Seeing the guy that had taken my humanity away, human, all of a sudden, because when you're in those situations, for some reason, they're not human. They are God. They're you can't survive without them. And I still to this day don't know how they do it. And I did 4 months with this guy, and this guy, in all fairness, was a really nice guy, regardless of the fact he had a criminal record. He showed me that I could do it on my own. I didn't need that perfect little family unit that I was desperate for. And he ended up going back to prison, so he decided to end the relationship because he wouldn't have me running around after him in prison and bringing up a baby, which I think is so adult. And now I'm so grateful for that, because I probably would have done that, you know, and, you know, he did what was best for all of us at the time. But then I went straight into another relationship within weeks, because as much as I knew I couldn't do the family thing with Daniel, I still kind of felt I'd failed this baby if I didn't give it a mum and a dad. So I got with an alcoholic, you know, and while there was no emotional or mental abuse, there was still physical abuse. He'd get drunk, come home, beat me up. But this time I'd fight back. And I won't lie, in that relationship, I'd say I was probably just as abusive physically as he was. I was damaged from my previous relationships, and he'd been through stuff too. And together we were just really toxic.
Yeah.
We loved the bones out of each other, but for some reason we just brought the toxic out in each other. And social services got involved. And I got really angry, because all my social services reports said the same thing. They never had an issue with my parenting, so I just couldn't understand for the life of me why they were that. I was like, she doesn't see domestic violence. She's in bed. It doesn't matter. You know, she's 2. She's a baby. She doesn't understand. Like, it doesn't affect her. And at that time, I truly believed that if, you know, under 2 years old, and if she hadn't seen something, it didn't affect her. She didn't know. obviously social services weren't happy with this, and they decided that if I didn't press charges for domestic violence, that they would go to court the next day, and basically take custody of my child. So I went to court the next day and I pressed charges. Thankfully, the guy realised I had to go to court, so he changed his plea to guilty, so I didn't have to go through the ordeal of all of the court process, because not everyone's court's not nice for anybody. And I was free from that relationship thanks to social services, but I was still very angry because I felt like they'd taken it away from me. They'd taken this family unit from my baby. No matter how imperfect it wasn't the first domestic abuse relationship I was in. It was never that bad. So it was dealable. You know, it didn't matter. He didn't do what Daniel did. So it was better. But it wasn't, you know, now I know that no level of domestic violence, physical, mental, financial, sexual, nothing is acceptable. It took me a long time to realise that. But we got free thanks to social services, and we went through a few more months kind of because I think they wanted to make sure that I didn't go back.
Yeah.
Which at the time really frustrated me, because I was like, I've done what you've asked. Like, what more do you want from me? But now I know, like, yeah, they needed me to prove that I wasn't just doing what they wanted, so I could then secretly squirrel back and fall into the same trap again.
Yes.
Because I honestly, truly believe now that if they hadn't have stepped in, one of us would have died. It was that volatile. And neither of us are overly bad people. Do you know what I mean? We were just too toxic together. And unfortunately, that just happens sometimes. We still love each other. And I think part of us always will love each other. We've always got a love for each other. Yeah. But we know that we can never be together. So we were able to kind of like have those conversations like years down the line afterwards. But I got free from the domestic violence, and I had to do all those courses, like all the ones to show that you're a victim, and then come into terms with the fact that, I was a victim.
Yeah.
Because I still didn't believe it. Do you know what I mean? I still was in this mindset of like, well, if I hadn't have done this or this hadn't have happened, he wouldn't have had to have reacted this way. Mm-hmm. So it took a long time for me to learn that, nothing was acceptable. But it had an ongoing effect on my health, which took a few years kind of to come up. I kind of lived in denial of it all. I kind of hid it all. I was dealing with a lot of mental health and PTSD. So kind of that was what was affecting my life.
Yeah.
Next. You just bug up as that. So that kind of took priority, and I ended up having to go on some quite heavy medication to be able to function normally. And that again took a while for me to wrap my head around. Being normal and then being reliant on pills every day to function.
Yeah.
I really struggled with that. Because let's face it, society does still find it taboo if you rely on medication. So it affected me that way. And then all the health issues started coming up. So I had scarring and things like that on my insides because of the damage I've been put through. So I needed a hysterectomy. But technically, because it was what the damage was, it was classed as cosmetic. It wasn't covered under the NHS. So I had to beg for 10 years of literally every doctor's I went to. I was like, can I get sterilised now? Can I get sterilised now? I'd go for a cold and I'd be like, can I be sterilised? And I think I just hounded them at the point they were like, fine, if you just stop asking, like, we will do it. Because I just knew that, like, after what I went through with my daughter and the conception that she had, I have got enough to contend with in life, and so will she, without having to bring the possibility of bringing a second, third, fourth, fifth child into this world. I wasn't prepared to do that. I knew that from her beginnings, it was going to have to be different from the get-go, and we were going to have to live very carefully. Because obviously the way she was conceived, and this man then went on to continue to be domestically violent. He went on to abuse children, and was on the sex offenders register for 10 years. Unfortunately, he's off now because 10 years is up. But So I had to live, I wouldn't say in fear, but that was part of it. It was fear that he would find her and he would take her, you know, even though legally, because of what he was, he couldn't take her. There was just still this gut feeling that I just had to live. And I changed my whole life. I moved away from everyone. Like, I was still in the same city, but I moved completely different area where I didn't know anybody. I didn't post anything on the internet for maybe 4 years. Like, I was terrified that a single picture would get back to him and that one photo would show where we lived and he'd be here. Which in some respects was so unrealistic, because he'd moved on, he'd found more victims. You know, I was gone. I was but a memory, you know. The fear never left. And don't get me wrong, there's always, I think, still going to be that fear in me when it comes to him because of the severity. But it's taken me 10 years, but we don't live in that fear anymore. I brought my little girl up with the fact that I knew I had to give her the tools to protect herself earlier than other kids. I knew that she had to be aware of everything, but I also knew that I didn't want to damage her. I didn't want to damage her future, and I wanted to make sure she had a childhood. So we made sure everything was age appropriate. She knew that, you know, it was just us against the world. And I've made sure that no matter what we do, she knows that as long as we're together, that we can go through, doesn't matter what we go through, we will make it out the other end, no matter how hard it is. And I think that's what's kind of saved me, has given her that strength from such a young age of like, we got this, don't matter how dark these days are, as long as we've got me and you, we'll make it through. And she knew from a young age that the guy who, you know, helped bring her into this world was in prison because he wasn't a very nice person. And we left it at that, you know, she didn't need to know anymore. No. Kids get curious. Yeah. So the older she got, the more questions happened. And to begin with, it was really hard because you go through so many emotions of, do I lie? You know, you don't just have the general conversation then of, you know, as an absent father. This is an absent father who's on the register and who's done some horrendous things. So how do you age appropriate that? You know, it's so hard. So as the years went on, it was just, he wasn't a very nice person, you know, and I was very careful to make sure that I didn't bad mouth him. Mm-hmm. While I'm aware he isn't a nice person, I wanted to make sure that everything I said was free of emotion. So whenever she got the full big picture, it was all fact. And she could never turn around and go, well, no, you said this because you were upset or angry, or he did this and that's why you said that. I wanted to make sure it was all very factual and none of the emotion was. And, you know, we've recently now had to come down to the conversation of the fact that, unfortunately, you know, the guy who brought you into this world has done bad things to children. And it was a system shock for her to a degree. You know, she was well aware of the fact that he was a bad person, a very bad person. You know, she's very aware of the fact that if you're in prison, you've done something to deserve it. You know, you've broken a law and you're there for a reason. Thanks. Sorry. So she took it better than I thought she would. And obviously we then kind of had to have, you know, she's 12 now. We had to have the age appropriate conversation of exactly what bad things to children mean. And my biggest fear in telling her was, one, thinking of me differently, and two, thinking of herself. And I am in what I class as a miracle position of she thinks neither. Okay. She has, I think it's just made her look at me stronger. The fact that I've kept her, because she also knows that at one point I didn't know if I could do it, and there was a chance she could have gone up for adoption at birth. Yeah. And I've been honest about that because it's part of her story. And she's very aware that she is so loved. She is so unbelievably loved. And that's what counts. And she knows that I have done everything for her. Yeah. And it's also given the mentality of, I don't need a dad, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's had to come from this situation. But she made it. So we've from something that started out how nothing should ever start, we've turned it into something beautiful. She's turned into an amazing little girl who's so clever. She's doing really well in school, and she is nothing like him, which was my biggest fear. And I think it would be anyone's biggest fear in that situation. And it was the hardest decision I think I will ever have. Yep. And I think bringing up a child from that situation is the hardest decision and hardest parenting thing anyone will ever have to go through, because nobody quite understands. Everyone has these jokes of like, well, you decided to have them, and well, yeah, you did to a degree, in the back of your mind, you're like, but I didn't, I made the best of the situation I was given. And while I would never change that, I would do everything. I would go through every single second of my life again, exactly the way it's happened, because I wouldn't be where I am now without it. I wouldn't have the amazing little girl that I've got. And while it's had its challenges, we've moved on from that. Dex! Sorry. Right. He's at the window. There's a dog outside. He's got excited. And in with all of that, like, my health was shot. I ended up getting a condition called cyclic vomiting syndrome. So apparently, because of all of the stress essentially I'd been under for so long and living in the fight and flight thing with PTSD constantly, my body decided that stress it just can't cope with, and it vomits itself into oblivion essentially. If I get overly stressed now, I'm literally sick hundreds of times a day. It caused horrific weight loss. I went from over 20 stone down to 8 in 8 months.
Wow.
It's a childhood disease, surprisingly. Majority it's something children have.
Right.
But it can continue into adulthood. It's something we live with every day. So cyclic vomiting syndrome, I'm nauseous every single day of my life now. It's just normality for me. I'm sick most mornings. Generally because I wake up and I get that like flood of anxiety with the PTSD, and then like I'll be sick. And then kind of I look like you kind of get into your own little groove with it, but then like you have the flare-ups, and with the flare-ups I literally spend anything from 12 hours to 7 days being best friends with my toilet. And then that added on, and because of that and the amount of weight I lost, I lost all the weight and it started eating my muscle, which then caused me to have POTS, the heart issue. So I had that, and then we kind of couldn't function for a while because we had so many health issues. We were bringing Alyssa up, like it was horrendous. So we started looking into assistance dogs, and I originally thought that they weren't a thing here. I thought they were just an American thing.
Yeah.
And then I realized that they were here. It wasn't just a guide dog. So I started looking into it more. And like one of the things I did anyway was I trained dogs. So I was like, I can convert this. Like if I can get the right dog and I can train it well enough with the right support and the right help, then maybe, I can get some sort of function back in my life. So I decided to go out and buy a puppy. And not gonna lie, there was a moment of madness after we bought this puppy where I was like, what have I done? I have ruined my life. I have just added a whole extra stress onto all of this. Like training a dog, I can't do this while I'm ill. Like, who am I kidding? But we were in this situation and we were going to make the best of it. So, Arlo, come here. Up.
Where is he?
He's here. So we got Arlo. Sit. Oh my God. There we go. So we got Arlo, and we started training Arlo from 8 weeks. Literally from the get-go, we started him with his basic training, and it was literally just your basic dog training we started off with. So we did that, and he's so clever. He clicked on so easily to anything. He knew sit within 4 training sessions.
Wow.
And my training sessions are 10 minutes long. So like he was quick. And the fact he's a lab meant he was already good at retrieving. So that was the first thing that I kind of taught him to do, was to get my sick ball. So his first task was to go and collect my sick ball when I was going to be sick, because sometimes you get into the toilet, it's just not an option. And I noticed he started kind of like, I wouldn't say alerting, because he hadn't learned it at this point, but he would definitely react to me a good 20 minutes before I'd start getting sick, before I even started realizing that I was feeling like I was gonna like start vomiting.
Right.
So I was like, okay. So I started posting in the like assistance dog groups on Facebook, like to other dog people that had trained the dogs, and I was like he's doing this, and they said he's made for this. Like, he is a natural. Like, if he has got the ability to sense whatever it is he's sensing, whack out what it is and feed it. And we worked out that Arlo was actually alerting to my blood pressure dropping.
Wow.
He could, I don't know whether he could smell it or just sense the difference, but he knew. And it was generally, we worked out since with the doctors, that he senses it just before it actually drops. So he knows before the drop. And I don't know how, I still can't explain it myself. So we started kind of getting him to kind of, when that was happening, we get him to jump up at me, because I'm pretty ignorant sometimes. If I'm busy, like pouring at me is going to do nothing. I'm going to be, leave me alone, I'm busy. So we taught Arlo to start jumping up and getting in my face. And he took to it so easily. And then he just started taking other things upon himself. Like when I've passed out a few times, and he would lie on my chest and like nuzzle me awake, which was already the start of something called deep pressure therapy, which is another task which is done with assistance dogs. Right. So I was lucky in the fact that kind of everything come naturally. And over the past 2 years, we've now trained Arlo to do a full task list. But his main tasks are to alert to my blood pressure and heart rate changes, to which he will jump up at me and make me sit down so I can kind of re-regulate those things. He can retrieve anything dropped, and collect things at name, so I can do like go get a sick ball, my pass, bank card. He can pay for things and carry my supermarket shopping.
Wow.
Which everyone in my local shop loves. I'm not allowed to pay anymore. They make the dog pay just because I think it excites them. They can give it to Arlo, please. What else can you do? He can go and get help. So if I have an issue where I'm being sick and I passed out, he can kind of go and get my daughter, or if I pass out and about, he can go and find somebody in uniform. He's trained to find someone in high vis or uniform to bring back to me. He is slightly mobility trained, so he can brace to help, which means he like hold himself still and sturdy enough so I can get myself up and down off of the floor. He has slowly become, in the past 2 years, my lifeline. While it came with its own set of challenges, as someone with social anxiety, everyone now looks at me because I have an assistance dog. It does bring a lot of questions, so I've had to kind of get over that social anxiety factor, because I didn't have an option. Everyone wants to know about the dog, so you got to learn to talk to people. It gave me the ability to kind of go out and not have to worry. Yeah. I know that like on a bad day I still won't go out, just because like being sick in public is a little bit embarrassing still, I'm not gonna lie. But like even on days that like aren't really bad but are still like a bit grotty, I can go out, because he can give me the ability to say, well, actually, you're not, in a minute you're gonna crash. So I can go, the dog's shouting at me, I need to kind of. And now, given the fact he's kind of got 18 months experience, kind of, because he really started proper working himself at 6 months old by his own volition, I now have got about a 15-minute warning with my pops, both I'm up and about. Wow. And I've got about a 4-minute warning with my vomiting syndrome flare up.
I find that really fascinating how dogs can sense that stuff, because we've seen in the media that there's dogs that can sniff out cancer and things like that. And there's obviously these kind of waves of smell or the sensitivity of the nose or something like that is attuned to something like that. How has that changed your life then, knowing that you've got that support there? And as you said, you called him your lifeline.
It was weird to begin with, like putting your health in the hands of a dog to some degree takes a lot of faith. And it was hard to wrap your head around, because there's always at the beginning there's this moment of like, what if they get it wrong? What if it's not too quick, or what if? And the more I thought like that, the more I was still stuck. And it was a case of like biting the bullet and literally putting my faith in him. And he just blew me away. This dog honestly takes everything in his stride. He wants me, he wants me to be healthy. Do you know what I mean? He is the lifeline. Lifeline is literally the only way to describe it. Like, without this dog, I couldn't go out. I couldn't live a relatively normal life. I would be stuck at home. He's my normality, basically.
It's fantastic. It's a really, really inspiring story, especially from that. And I just want to kind of go back, because I realize that not everybody will be able to listen to, or not everybody will be able to speak about an experience like that you've just described, kind of from your life growing up, in such a, I suppose, in such an intricate and descriptive way. I mean, is there anything that you've learned from that? Because you said that it had, you would go back and do it again, in terms of it's created who you are today. So you're obviously very proud of who you are. Is there anything that you've learned going through the process that perhaps anyone that's going through anything similar, knows anyone going through something that could perhaps kind of help them, or that you could pass on?
No matter what decision that you make, it's the right one for you. Every decision I was trying to make when deciding to leave domestic violence, when deciding to bring a child up from that situation, I kept basing it at the beginning on society and what was socially acceptable, or what could be socially easier. And it made it harder to come to terms with, or to live with. And the moment I started realizing that every decision had to be made for what was right for me and mine, regardless of society pressures and what society says is okay, is what I had to do. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to have moments where you doubt your entire existence. I think bringing up a child from that situation is probably the hardest form of parenting you will ever have. You go through a guilt stage where you want to give them everything because you feel the need to make up for where they came from, and that doesn't work. It brings up a self-righteous child who thinks they know everything, they want everything. And you've got to give yourself a break. That even though that's where this came from, whether you decided to go down the route that I did and bring up the child, or whether you gave that child up, or whether you went down the route of an abortion, it's okay. And I'm proud of you, and society's proud of you, because it's not talked about enough. There are so many women out there that are bringing up these children and they're too afraid to say that this is where they came from, because people look at you different, because they don't get how you can do it. And don't get me wrong, I still don't understand in some ways how I've done it. I look back and I'm like, wow, how did I get through that? I don't know, but I had to, I had to make sure that, to me, that little girl was mine. She wasn't anyone else's. She was my little girl. I was mum and I was dad. And I said that to myself from the get-go. And that's kind of what helped push me through. And knowing that every decision that I made, and when she found out my story and her own story, she could stand up and say that no matter where you come from and how dark a situation you've been in, you can make whatever you want to be. It might not be perfect, and it might not be what society says means you've made it. But from where we were to where we are now, I've got a lovely 12-year-old little girl who's doing well at school. I've been running my own business. I've got, my assistant's dog. I've got another dog. I've got an amazing group of friends around me. And there are people that haven't been through that can't say that haven't made it to where we are today. So no matter where you've made it afterwards, you've done it. You've succeeded. You've won. And that's what gets you through.
Wow. I've got a question now that's been kind of bumbling around my head before I want to get on to something slightly different. But I'm going to ask this question first. Is there anything that anyone could have done to help you get out of what you were going through? Because, and the reason I asked this, just for a bit of context, is I know that you've said before, and we know it's very common for some of the tactics of someone that's controlling and showing those signs and abuse and everything else, is that you rationalize everything based on it. Well, it's okay because I'm hard to deal with, or it's okay because it must be partly my fault, or there's always a reason why it's okay, almost as a survival piece. Is there anything anyone could have done to get you out of there? So if anybody saw what was happening, or if family as well, is there anything?
It's gonna sound really crazy, but the more people tried to tell me it was abuse, the more shut down I was gonna be. Deep down, I think we all know the situation we are in is abuse. We all know deep down we are all just living in this denial of self-preservation with someone that we feel we can't breathe without. If someone had literally said, whichever way you're going to do, I'm going to support you, I think I would have had the strength to have stood up sooner, rather than everyone trying to tell me that I was in a bad situation, that you had to get out, because it did the opposite. Because you're then like, I don't want everyone else to be right. And to some degree, I know it sounds weird, but pride does have an effect on, we don't want to be a victim, we don't want our marriages or our relationships to fail. We're women, we're supposed to make them work. 20, 30 years ago, it was normal. It was legal, on the side of things, which is sad, but we're still on the tail end of that as society. And it's something that society we are still battling against, and still something that we're working on in society that's becoming better, but we're not quite there.
I'm glad you've said that. Because it's really difficult as what we call kind of an active bystander in a situation like that, where you see the signs and you see what's going on. And I've experienced something similar in terms of people trying to help me in a situation, and it's that inherent, no, you almost become empowered and say, no, I'm making my choices, and it's not as bad as you're making out, and it's going to be all okay. And then it takes you deeper into the issue, doesn't it? And there seems to be very few people that do go, I hear you, I'm concerned for you, I hear what you're going through, whatever you decide to do, I'm still here for you.
Yeah.
Because that's really hard. I think that's really hard to do. I think it's valid to say that's really hard to do, and not everyone is equipped to do that.
No, they're not. And it is, I've had to ask friends of that, and they're not here anymore because they couldn't do that. And that's okay, because they had to do what they had to do to keep themselves mentally and physically safe. And, you know, I've also been on the outside where I've had to be that for my friend. I've had to sit there on the outskirts, and it is so hard not to get involved. But the more you get involved, the closer you are pushing them into staying in a weird roundabout way. And I know verbally it sounds weird, but that is the grand scheme of it. Because at this point, you're already so far in that if anyone badmouths that relationship, it's just instilling what he's told you. He's told you this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Months and months ago, this man told you that these people are going to say these things, and now they're saying it. It just feeds into what he's created.
It does. It does. So I want to change the tone a little bit.
Yeah.
If that's okay. In fact, I want to change it so far that it's unrecognizable.
Let's flip it.
I would like to know, if you were a superhero, what powers would you have and what would you use them for? Because I love the superheroes, because this is why it's a superhero finder, right? So I just thought, indulge me.
So I'm really sorry, like, we're gonna have to say talk to animals, because, like,
yeah,
animals are awesome, and it's me. I'm a dog person. But I think I would also like the ability to see the future. Not for myself, and not for, like, the big things of, like, winning the lottery and things like that, but for those people who need guidance, and not to tell them their future, but just to kind of be like, maybe this is what you want to pay a little bit more attention to, just to maybe ease those people into making better decisions without affecting the big scheme of things massively, if that makes sense. You know, being that, like, secret little good person, that helps change their future for good, but nobody really knows about it, because I did it in such a sly way.
Yeah, almost like the idea of the watcher.
Yeah.
From the outside, that can just help nudge, because you can see what's going to happen. I like that. That's a really kind of holistic power, isn't it? No, I love that. Well, do you know what? It's been absolutely fascinating finding out, because even I didn't know, you know, even as friends online, I didn't know some of the stuff. And thank you very much for being and for allowing yourself to be so open and honest about it. There's loads of other things that I'm sure we could have spoken about, but time.
Time.
And Arlo wants to be back on the camera as well. So for anyone that is listening rather than watching, Arlo's now on the camera. Try to take over, taking his limelight.
Yeah, as always.
Izzie, if anyone wants to, or are you happy if anyone would like to, following this episode, ask you any questions or get in touch about anything? Is there a way they can do that you're happy with?
Yep. If you just look up my TikTok, it's Apocalypse Dogs. And put any questions in the comments, follow me, drop me a message, and I can get back to you. Or on the comments on the video.
Wonderful. And if anybody's failing that, get in touch with me. My Instagram is there. I always do it the wrong way. The Kindest Strong Man. And I just want to say, guys, if you are watching, you'll have seen this link above. It's been on episodes for a while now. For the price of a coffee, or probably less than, like a Costa Express from Tesco Express or whatever, you can support me in carrying on making these episodes, because this is a labour of love, and I don't get paid for it. I never wanted to get paid for it, but it does allow me just to spend the time out with my other jobs creating that. So please feel free to have a look. If you're not watching, then you'll need the link. It's www.patreon.com/thekindeststrongman. And for now, that leaves us only one thing to do. And it's two words that I always finish my episodes with. And I would like to say, from me and from Izzie, stay super, everyone.